All right, welcome back for week 18, day 2. Continuing on in our React education and introduction. Yesterday we did learn about how to set up our React projects and a little bit about components. And today we're going to expand onto that. And because yesterday when we made our React site, it was static, right? Which means nothing changed. We threw things up on the screen. There was no interaction with the user. You're just reading a website. There was nothing dynamic about it. So React, though, is amazing in how it handles dynamic interactions. And we're going to learn about kind of how one piece of the puzzle for those that the dynamic capabilities today. So in review here, how do I start up a React app? I'm in a fresh, brand new directory. There's nothing here. Actually, it was the same one we did yesterday, but I literally just deleted that base folder of the Vite project. So you can do that too if you want to throw out your old stuff and just start new. You just throw out the whole folder and it's gone. How do I start a React project, specifically with the Vite foundation?
You gotta do was npm create byte latest,
I think it's
something like that.
yeah, I think it's at latest.
Yeah,
No,
at latest.
what is it? I have it still here. Oh, there's no dash. Okay. Pretty dang close though. We would have gotten it looking at our documentation, but okay, let's go ahead and create a new project. I'm just going to go ahead and keep the default name because I don't really care. It's just for practice. But when you do your own project, make it something meaningful for the name. We're choosing React always, and we're using JavaScript. Okay. And now that we've got our project, we can see the project folder right here with our public source and all the rest of these extra files that we didn't really go into, except for the index. Now we see, again, this prompt here. Once we've gotten our React project up, we need to do these things. It says now run. So now we need to change directory into our Vite project. And we need to npm install. What does npm install do again for our project?
It installs all the packages.
All the packages that we need to play around in here, exactly. Now, do I need to do npm run dev at the end?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, if I want to look at my project while I'm working on it, but you don't really have to. You can work on it and then npm run dev whenever you want to look at it. But yes, trick question. If you if you want to look at your web page while you're working on it, you do need to run npm run dev. That's what starts up the server. Okay, so we have my project and it once we did our npm install, we got all our node modules, which are all those packages that we're using, all the dependencies that React has for us to be able to work in it. Okay, so we're going to go back and look at our app page. Let's npm run dev to kind of take a look at one of the new concepts we're looking at today. Okay, so if we look at this stuff here is kind of, well, that looks interactive, but that's just those links. We know how to do links in HTML. So all these elements here are just static elements that we know how to do in HTML. But this right here, this count is 0, and I click it, it changes what I see on my screen. So this is a dynamic feature we're going to look into today. Every time I click, the number increments. So looking in our code here, we can see a couple of things. We can see this count thing. I think that's probably associated with that counter there. We can see that there's a button, and when you click it, we have the sec count and count down here. So I assume what we're looking at is going to be this and this here. So we are learning about states today. This is the key to anything interactive on your React website. It's called a state. React has a whole bunch of functions, or they sometimes call them hooks, that you can use that will trigger this website to re-render automatically. So every time I click this, if it didn't get triggered to re-render, it would not show an updated count. It would just keep that last count value without the render. So React has this cool thing called state, which anytime this state changes or updates, it triggers something internally in React to redo this page so that we see, new data on the screen. So let's take out a few things here and kind of look. And if you read the README today or are following along with the README, it says, with your understanding of components and props, that is false. You only know components. Props are tomorrow or Thursday. So just ignore that part. And we don't need to know about props for today's concept. So let's take a look at how this state and use state function works in React. So yesterday, for those that watched me do the extra example, I explained how most of the time down here in the return, this is where your HTML is going. And then you can throw in some JavaScript features in here, and I'll kind of explain that a little bit more when we're looking at the state, but anything up above the return, because this is just a JavaScript function, right? It's a JavaScript function with our curly brackets. So anything above the return statement, we can write JavaScript up here, and we can do things that we used to do in JavaScript, like algorithms and figuring stuff out. And we can see this function here. We can increment our count and that sort of thing. So you can do that anywhere up here. And we see they even have a little bit down here, but we'll get into that in a second. But this is where we're going to have our states. Now, when you want to have like a variable in JavaScript up here to manipulate and store things in, you can never, ever just do let count equals 0 or whatever, or 1, whatever. Okay, well, because count, let's do something else. Example. So this is a no-go in React. Even though this is how we're used to, declaring variables in JavaScript, and this is how we're used to working with them, React, because of the way it renders the pages with updates to these variables, you can't just declare something static, manipulate it, and insert it into the code and expect React to pick up that there was a change to it, if that makes sense. So anytime you want to set a variable to manipulate and use, like in your code somewhere, you need to use what's called a state, which is up here. And this is, first we need to import it. You'll always import use state from React. It's going to go pretty much on every single page you work in React. And then it's set up where you declare a constant variable here, and then you have brackets, and within it you have the name of the variable, and then you have after it a function. It's called set. Usually it's called set and then the variable name. And what this is this is declaring the variable name, and this is declaring a function that will update this variable. So instead of saying let example equal 1, we would do constant example, because that's the variable we want to declare. And then we need this helper function, which we'll look at a little more in a bit. We'll call it set example. Okay. And whenever you have a state used here, like we did here, you have to set the value for this variable. So when we did let example equals 1, 1 was going to be our variable for that variable from the get-go, right? And then we were going to manipulate it afterwards. So this is where we would set the value of this variable. We can't just say example equals, or example 1, whatever, example equals 1. You can't do that. You cannot ever take this variable and manipulate it directly. So instead of saying example equals 1, we have to set example and pass it in a value. Okay? So up here, we set a variable count and this helper function, which works on that count. Let's take this out so we're not confused. And can somebody tell me what this variable is initialized to? What's the value of count?
0.
0, correct. Because we've used our, oh, I'm sorry, we have to use state, not set count or set whatever. You have to use state. That's the name of setting it right off the bat. So just follow, it's in our README and it's up in your, and when you get your example application running, it's up on top right away, but you're gonna do your constant variable name, set variable name equals use state, and then the value you're initializing it to. So this one says, set this count to 0. All right, so now to access and update this state, we can't, like I said, we can't just say count equals count plus 1. We cannot do this in React. It doesn't work like that. And it even gives you some, it's not working. It's a state now that we're using to re-render our page. So instead of setting count equals count plus 1, we have to use our helper function here to assign a new value to it. So we're going to set the count and we want it to be count plus 1. Okay, so that's how we would change the value of count, is we'd set it and then do whatever kind of manipulation we want within this parenthesis here. The cool thing is whenever this variable gets touched or changed, like I said, the page re-renders automatically and it will show the new value on the screen. So we can see down here, instead of doing like a set count up here, we all know event handlers, we have an on click here. So anytime you use like a JavaScript type component in this return statement, because this is like HTML and JavaScript combined, they have a special way you have to work with JavaScript down here. So you can grab this variable name like they did here, but to kind of tell React that, hey, it's a JavaScript variable we're accessing or JavaScript object, you need to enclose it in these curly brackets. So you can throw that in wherever in your HTML, as long as you put your curly brackets, and it will know that you're talking about this variable up here that we defined in our state. So here, same thing with functions. We have our onClick, which is going to be a function. It's a JavaScript function. And so we have to have curly brackets around it to say, hey, this is going to be JavaScript. Okay, get ready to read JavaScript. So this is a fat arrow function, right? Dig back to way early on in the course when we learned about all of our algorithms and data structures. So we have our fat arrow structure here, fat arrow function with our function not taking in any parameters. And then, so we have it as an on click. So when that element is clicked in the DOM, it's going to set count to the count, and it's going to take in the count that we currently have because it's grabbing this variable right here. taking in that count. Now, I said we had to put curly brackets around JavaScript variables. Why is there none around this count? Any ideas?
Because it's already in curly brackets.
Correct, yes, because we've already got these curly brackets here saying that everything within it is going to be kind of JavaScript-esque. We don't have to do another curly bracket around the variable. It will just automatically know that's a JavaScript thing here. So when we set count, we're taking in, so set count is a function to update the value of this variable, right? So we're passing in the current count, what's stored in this variable currently, and then we're returning count plus 1. So when we return that, in this right here, that count plus 1, then we're going to set the count, set the variable with that new value. Do we see how that works? So typically, we would probably see, instead of, if we weren't using state, this would look like, let me copy it. Let's see. This is for if you're not envisioning it well. If it was normal, let's see. So if we didn't have a state, we would probably, let's see, pass in, I think it's like this. We would pass in the count, like if we did like let count equal 0, we would pass in count and then we'd return count plus 1. But we can't do that with our states. We can't access the, or we can't change their value directly. So that's why anytime we're changing that value, we use the set function. Okay, I mean, this is kind of an odd concept to think about, but any questions that are jumping out right away? Pretty much if you're working with a variable, like if you catch yourself trying to do a const variable name or a let variable name equals this, you stop and you make it a state instead. I should never ever see a let, a var, or a const anywhere on its own. I mean, you have it here, but it needs to be with a state. You should not just have a random variable floating around doing its own thing. And then again, just re-emphasizing, you cannot change count directly. You can't ever do count equals count plus 1. You have to use whatever helper function to change the value. So we could do something like let temp num equal, let's see, count. Or I guess let added, maybe added number makes more sense. So let added number equals count plus then, and then we can set count to be added number. So you can use like helper variables, I guess, if that makes sense, that don't really have an impact on your overall application. Just to kind of maybe hold a value before you set your variable to that new value. But for the most part, everything's going to be in a state. And you will do all your calculations within this function. Okay. Just making sure we're on the same page here, because for the second half now, we're kind of doing like a turn signal and learning about something else besides state. We kind of have some state here, I guess. So any last minute questions before I move on to the next topic? And we see how we can add JavaScript down in our return statement with curly brackets. Okay, so now Next thing we're going to learn about is conditional rendering. Oh, Art, you have a question. Sorry.
Would you prefer to see this button as its own component, or is it okay putting the documentation here?
Yeah, so I guess it depends on how often you think you'd reuse it. If you think you'd have a button like this on in other places in your website, then definitely make it its own component. But if it's like a one-off feature that you don't expect to repeat anywhere else, don't bother making a component. Just throw it in. I wouldn't throw it in app. I'd throw it somewhere else and just, but we'll see that as we progress through React. App is pretty much going to be your page routes for your website when you're all said and done. And then your pages will have all the components on them. But that's a good question. It's up to you. It'll be up to you what things you want to reuse as a component, just what makes sense for your application. This button seems very unique. I don't think I'd expect to have another button anywhere else that does the same exact thing as this one. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, so now we are going to learn about conditional rendering. So right now we are throwing everything up into our website and we see everything at all times, which is great. But it's not how real life works, right? When we go into various applications, a lot of times based on like your access level will determine what you see on that application, right? Like difference between a free user and a premium user. A free user is going to see a very bared down site. Premium user is going to have a lot more bells and whistles. So we can do that with React by doing conditional rendering. So we can make it so certain components are visible in some cases, but not in other cases. So that's what we're going to look at now. We can use, the README is very good at explaining these conditionals if you want to follow along with those, but we can use if, else, and else if statements to do these conditions. Let's see. So we're going to do an example that's kind of mirroring like signing up on the website. Like, let's make a component. So let's make our components folder. Because the point of this is we're going to have this component visible only if a user is logged in. So let's say you come to the web page and it's like, welcome. I don't know how I want to do this. Or sign in below. I don't know. Sign in below. And then it'll have like a input with prompt thing, whatever. I think that's how that works. Let's see. Let's see what it looks like. Yeah. Or next to it. I don't have CSS, so it's sign in next to it. Anyways, just a very rough, like, let's say they're coming to this website. This is what they're greeted with first. But then when they sign in, I want them to see like a different page with more things on it. I want a menu popped up, that sort of thing. So let's make a component that will have like a welcome banner. It looks like we're doing. So again, I don't remember this, how to do it, so I'm just gonna pull it in here. C, Control V. I'm gonna make this welcome banner. Ah, shoot. Ah, too smart. Okay, I'm not using a state right here yet. This welcome banner is going to say, thank you for signing in. We're just making it, oh, let's put some headers. Making it super simple just for the sake of showing conditional rendering. Okay. Okay, so now we have this welcome banner component. But I don't want this to pop up if the user is not signed in. I only want this to pop up if they put in their sign-in information and, submit it, and then they can see that. So let's also, because this, if I do a component under here, this will be visible all the time, right? Because it's in our app.jsx, and we don't want that either, right? We don't want this visible all the time, because after they sign in, we want this to go away. So let's make another component. Doesn't make sense to keep that on our main page forever and ever. We want it to come and go. So let's make a sign in. JSX. And we're pretty much just going to move this into here. Let's name this sign in prompt. Okay. All right, so I have my two components. I have a sign-in prompt page component and a welcome banner component. When somebody comes to this website, I want them to see a sign-in prompt if they're not logged in. So how am I going to track a login? What's a good way to kind of figure out if somebody, like, how could I do that? How could I kind of set a flag to show that somebody's logged in? Just like super simple.
Count on the login button.
So like a count on the login button. Okay. I
That's
think,
probably a dumb way to do it, but I'm just thinking out loud.
yeah, no, we can brainstorm this out loud because it's been a while since we worked in JavaScript. So we aren't really remembering, and Django Python is a completely different type of style of programming than what we're doing here. So I'm thinking I just like that could possibly work doing a count, but that could get messy. I mean, we can change the count from like a 0 or 1, which would be like a Boolean, right? Like a true or false. Are they signed in? True. Are they not? False. So I'm thinking of having like a flag that we can assign values to based on what the user does on the screen. Like if they click a button and it checks out, once they click that button, maybe it will set that flag to true for signed in. So I think that would be a good way to hold this. And it's going to take a while to get our brains back to thinking like this again with all these algorithms. So I want to have a variable that holds like a Boolean. Are they signed in? Yes or no? That sort of thing. Just so that I can reference that and do things based on if they're signed in. So if I say I want a variable holding that value of if they're signed in or not, what should I do?
You can do const. You can put is logged in or something like that. Whatever const is logged in. Within the brackets.
Okay. Yep.
And then you can do set login or is logged in or set is logged in, yeah. And equals use state. And you can set it at the start value of false.
So let's start it with false. Okay, yes, exactly. So I wanted a variable to hold the true or false, basically, if they're logged in or not. Cannot do a variable by itself. I have to use a state. So now, and this is extremely helpful because if they do something that would, like, let's say they click a button and on click, maybe it changes this state to true. That's super unsecure way, but just for example purposes, if they click the sign in button, then it can set state to true. Then this will cause React to re-render the page based on this new information. So it'll all of a sudden it will say, okay, we got some new information. Now we see is logged in as true. Let's go ahead and do everything we need to do based on this new value. So we can use, let's see, I'm just going to show, I don't really do this first condition much from the README. So it's showing you can do like an if a certain condition return some component, else if there's a second condition, return another component. So this can be used, but there's an easier way to do it. The ternary and the ands are what you're gonna be using most of the time. So we can use regular kind of JavaScript. Do you remember ternary functions? Where we have like some value, question mark, like some value, is this true or false? And then if it's true, you do this on true. And then you have your or, do this on false. Right? So that's our ternary operators. So we could do the same thing down here. If I'm going to do a JavaScript function down here, what do I need to do to signify to React I'm working in JavaScript now?
Curly braces.
Curly braces, yes, we're going to use these curly brackets. And I'm going to say, okay, so if this person is logged in, I want them to see the welcome banner. If they're not logged in, I want them to see a sign-in prompt, right? So following this ternary condition that we have kind of a guideline up here. So I am looking at some value, which our value would be, are they logged in, right? This state right here. We're going to start calling it state, even though it's technically our variable. So we're going to look at this state's value. When we initialize, this state is going to be set to false. Just keep that in the back of your head. But so we're going to look at this state. We're going to say, okay, is logged in. So what is the value of that state? If it's true, if they are logged in, then go ahead and throw in the welcome banner. So we can just call our component right here within this JavaScript. So that's if it's true. Otherwise, if it's false, we want them to see the sign-in prompt component. And I'm doing the shortcuts to import these. I just started typing the component and tabbed over when it found them. But you remember to import if it doesn't automatically do it for you. So now I'm using this kind of structure with our ternary operation in JavaScript. And I'm using it down here to render a component based on the value of this state. So right now, when I look at this website, what do I expect to see when I pull it up?
Sign-in prompt.
Yep.
Yep, exactly. I expect to see a sign-in prompt. Why do I see a sign-in prompt?
Because the is logged in is currently set to false.
Correct. I'm going to have y'all keep spitting it out to me so we understand state. Yes, exactly. We've initialized this state to false. So we have not messed with it yet. There's nothing in here that messes with this state. So when I pull up this website, it should show me a sign-in prompt if it's working. What are we doing wrong? Did I forget something? Is logged in. Const is logged in. Welcome banner has our export default. Sign-in prompt. And it has our fragments. Welcome sign in below. Well, Why? Why? Okay,
Tiffany, the README has those double ampersands after is logged in. Does that
the
have anything?
double ampersands. Oh, that's further down. That's a different type of way to do this, which we'll look at in a second. First, we're looking at this ternary, which is the some condition, is it true or false? If it's true, you do this. If it's false, you do that. So this is the first way. And I guess I just had to re-render, like refresh and wait for it to catch up because now we can see it's working. I don't know what, maybe I had something somewhere that didn't need to be. I don't know. Weird. Sometimes it's weird. But we can see it's the state is initially set to false. So this expression goes to the sign-in prompt because that's the falsy there. And we can see that component is rendered on the screen. If we did some sort of feature that has that sign in and on that click on, we'd probably do it in here, like an on click, set that state to true, which will learn how you can access this state even within a component that's nested in here. I keep saying tomorrow, but Thursday, that's props. Props will teach you how to do that. But typically you'd have something here that would change that state to true after you log in. So let's look at it now. If that state, we're just going to manually change it to true. We haven't set state anywhere else. And now, hey, we can see it's signed in. So, all right. So that is the ternary operator, how you can conditionally render components based on a state, like a flag in a state. So now the other one we're going to look at is the and operator. So it's kind of similar. This one's going to be some condition and then do this if true. So this is a lot simpler. However, in this, we can only display, we can't do like an either or kind of conditional render. This one's going to only render one thing if the expression or the condition is true. So it's usually condition and content. So let's say we didn't really care about a sign-in prompt. We're just checking if we're just going to throw up a welcome banner. So we can look at that is logged in and then say and welcome banner. So what it's going to do is it's going to say, is this true? Yes. All right. So then we're going to render this on the screen because then both will be true. But if this is false, it's going to automatically exit out of this expression and not render this screen. So now if we if we have is logged in is true, we should expect to see this welcome banner on the screen. I'm going to refresh to make sure. Yes. So we can see our welcome banner. Thank you for signing in. Now, if it's false, unlike our ternary, which had, the either or render, like do this if it's true or do that if it's false, this one doesn't have anything happening when it's false. This one just says throw this on there if it's true. So now if we look, we shouldn't see anything because there's no components that will render. Empty. All right. Any questions on conditional rendering? That was it for that. You'll typically do either the and or the ternary with the colon, the question mark and colon to render different components. And typically you set it to a state or the condition. No questions? All right. Well, let me stop recording. We'll kind of go over the challenge and then the extra example. Let me stop recording.